Hello and welcome to this fourth edition of the Echo Chamberlain livestream, a livestream that has now officially outlasted She-Hulk and won just as many Emmys as Better Call Saul. But I'm not going to do it alone, so let's just get the guests on straight away. And my first guest, in a YouTube community of vibrant and colorful names of It's a Gundams, Vex Electronicas, and Metal Commanders, my first guest remains stoically and resolutely Greg Owen. You know him as Greg Owen because his name is Greg Owen. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Greg Owen. Oop, there he is. Right there.
Good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I am Greg Owen.
That's true. How's things in the neurotic powder keg of America these days?
Well, we've got some exciting election stuff coming up. All we have left to run for president is the current one, and then Donald Trump or Nikki Haley, who loves war. So things are very exciting here right now as we look to the future to see who we will be fighting and where in the world we will be fighting. It's going to be fun.
Well, yeah, I mean, as a New Zealander, I'm obviously expecting the cavalcade of refugees from when some apocalyptic event happens your way, but in the meantime, let's bring on our second guest. My next guest was raised on Larry Mullen Jr. Street in the Adam Clayton district of the town of Edge in County Bono. He has the soul of Joyce, Yeats, and Beckett, and Sinead O'Connor dedicated Nothing Compares to You to him. It is Despot of Antrim.
Thanks very much. Well, you know, Greg, very few people realize this, but I did run for president of the United States. Oh. My first video on my channel is my platform, fully fleshed out. It's like 12 minutes long, which is, probably far longer than it needs to be for a presidential platform. But yeah, I didn't get elected though.
Better around here.
Yeah, I didn't win. I was thinking about running again, but YouTube demonetized the video, so.
I think you would have, except the Constitution forbids you, as you're not a natural-born American citizen.
Sorry, I'm going to change. I got a plan for that. I got a plan. I'm going to change the law ex post facto once I get elected.
Excellent.
The other president did the same thing.
Well, I'd vote for you. I've been hopping around whenever I can about your video dissecting women talking, which I thought was a tour de force. It actually had that amazing thing of it leaves you with a lingering feeling of resentment afterwards. Like it was on my mind. It was on my mind for ages afterward. So that's testament to a good video. But I didn't really know much about the film, so I thought it was quite audacious of you to take something kind of obscure because it mattered to you, and then to break down, all the aspects of masculinity, the sanctimony of it as well. So I thought you did a great job breaking that down.
Yeah, even down to the cinematography, it's just an absolutely terrible movie. The dialogue is something else. I mean, bear in mind, this thing won Best Adapted Screenplay, and the dialogue is obviously dreadful. Mm-hmm. But that's the kind of shout that not just the Oscars, like all sorts of awards organizations, they liked it for whatever. Well, they didn't like it. No one liked it, but they had to pretend that they liked it. And that really fascinated me, that socio-political aspect of it, whereby people... Do you know what the Abilene paradox is?
I'm not familiar.
Basically, the Abilene paradox is where a group of people all have to pretend they think the same thing, even though no one does. So, for example, three people are all staring at a piece of graffiti, right? Three hipsters. And they all think it's shit, but they all want the other two to think that they're cool. So they're like, oh man, it's so cool. It's so edgy. It's so punk. Right. And no one thinks this. They all think it's garbage. And I think that the Abilene paradox was going on a big time with that women talking movie. None of the critics wanted to be thought of as sexist or misogynistic or not supporting women. And it was also during the tail end of the Me Too movement, so they were afraid to call bullshit on it.
Hey, 2 + 2 = 5, Winston. You better say it and you better believe it.
Exactly.
And now then. The reposing remains of Robert the Bruce, Robbie Burns, and William Wallace were discreetly exhumed and, in a state-of-the-art laboratory, their DNA harvested, spliced together, and soaked in a vat of Lagavulin whiskey, finally emerging as the fully-fledged pop-cultural commentariat entity that is my featured guest. The toilet duck guzzling, Edinburgh Festival tourist harassing, liver cirrhosis denying, pissed and pithy problematic provocateur who, despite all his protestations that we go away now, we, with equally stubborn persistence, keep gravitating toward. He is the critical drinker,
Hey man, good to be on. I'm really pleased that you chose Lagavulin as the whiskey of choice there. So if my remains had to be put into something, it would be a cask of that. So thank you.
Well, the reality is I've never actually drunken any because to have it imported into New Zealand it costs a goddamn fortune. So I haven't had the
Whatever it
pleasure.
is, it's worth it, sir. I can guarantee that.
I
Now,
guess so.
forgive me for asking the obvious question, but like, surely you have missed the trick with this. This live stream should be the echo chamber.
Yeah, several people have suggested that, and I think with just a contrarian refusal to accept the obvious is preventing me from making that change.
Are you channeling your inner Mark Felton at the moment?
Yeah.
I'm never going to change.
You mean Mark Felton, the war video?
Yeah, I saw your video
love that
about
guy.
him. And weirdly, you got me into his videos. I started watching them like, oh man, this is just like a kind of gray mist that rolls over me and I can fall asleep to it.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's a huge boon and you know, a really great privilege. I'm glad that Rogue Elements is coming along, but I wonder if you've missed a trick in terms of cost cutting with extras. Like I think we all would have loved to see Gary in a 1-second cameo flailing around with squibs going off, you know, getting shot by machine gun fire. That could have been cool.
I think we'd all like to see that. Yeah, I think the problem is it would actually cost so much to fly Gary in for something like this.
That's true.
That would have been prohibitive because Gary doesn't just do this sort of thing for nothing. You know, he's a man in demand. So yeah, maybe in my next movie I'll be able to get him.
I mean, Az has been working on his physique for a year, and you've denied him the opportunity to get oiled up and run around like Commando. So it's a shame.
He needs just a little more time. He's almost there. He's almost cooked, but not quite. So I'm going to give him a little bit more. Me and him are going to do that Rocky 3 slow motion run down the beach together, and then hug afterwards as the waves crash over us. It's going to be beautiful. Just to get ready.
Well, let's get straight to the news here. Well, I've been casting my eye around the world's newspapers and periodicals, and by an extraordinary and happy coincidence, it was a Scottish newspaper that actually produced what I thought was quite an arresting and engaging headline. And I think, Drinker, you're going to have to break it down for us and tell us what's going on here. So we have Pole Shock, critical drinker, now leading Humza Yousaf as preferred leader of SNP. Were you aware of this?
I mean, I'm relatively confident that this bottle of beer here is leading Humza Yousaf as leader of the SNP in the polls. Yeah, it's like, well, there we go. My candidacy is now up for everyone to know about. No, man, he's not the most popular leader that we've seen. I'll say that much. And this is following in the wake of Nicola Sturgeon as well. That's impressive.
I thought she was kind of popular. Didn't everyone like her?
She was kind of polarizing, I think. And then when all the expenses, or should I say the financial scandals came out, that was pretty much curtains for her. And then mysteriously, all of her WhatsApp messages relating to the COVID lockdowns have mysteriously disappeared. It's funny how that keeps happening to high-ranking political leaders, and no one seems to know why. Who knows? Anyway.
Well, I mean, I'm a good natural strategist. You're going to need a campaign manager. Are we doing this or not?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm going to
cards on the table. I need an answer.
I want to become Emperor of Scotland, and I think this is the best way to go about it. So I'm in.
All right. Well, Despot is going to retroactively make himself eligible to be president of the United States, and you'll be in Scotland. So I don't know. Anyway, let's get to some actual news. This is also from a Scottish newspaper. 1 in 3 Scottish people now own a greyhound. So yeah, housing and funding drive leads to unpredicted success. So now I think you've just created a new problem on top of the old one.
1 in 3. Honestly, those are rookie numbers. You got to pump those numbers up.
And lastly, this is from the Scottish Daily Express. Tatiana, I just want my life back. Eastern European pole dancer opens up about abduction ordeal.
So lies. She said she was up for it.
So I think this might actually scupper your campaign for SNP. So we're kind of going backwards now.
Well, you know, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. It's been a hell of a ride.
Especially if you threaten an Eastern European pole dancer with an actual sword. But here we go. Let's get to some actual news. And of course, we're going to start off with Mando. Dear old Mando. So this is the bottom of the barrel in terms of the Lucasfilm slate. This is the one. This is their best bet. The one that they're leading with. This is our surefire hit above everything else. And Mandalorian isn't, in my mind, isn't proper Star Wars. It's ersatz Star Wars. It's kitsch Star Wars. It's more closer to those stupid Ewok films in the 80s than it is to actual Star Wars films. We gravitated towards this because it was an escape from the stupid operatic, huge spectacle, long feature films. We wanted the escape into something smaller and intimate and more basic and fun. And now they're going to swip it around and they're going to take the cool, small, intimate thing and they're going to engorge it into some stupid feature film. So you can see him swimming through money there because that's all that really counts. So thoughts, boys?
I think this was always going to happen when any project that they did gets just a tiny whiff of success. The studio were going to swoop right in and just absolutely cannibalize it in their desperate quest to not be bankrupt. And so all that measure of individuality and creative control that Favreau had over The Mandalorian that kind of made it somewhat passable entertainment just went out the window, and it became this just launching pad for like a million other extended universe pieces of garbage TV shows, and that's all it became. It was just a means to an end ultimately, and now they're trying to take it full circle by bringing it back into movie format, which is exactly the opposite of what it's supposed to be. I think we talked about this on Open Bar, that Mando doesn't lend himself to big epic adventures where the fate of the universe is at stake. He's supposed to be just a guy collecting bounties and doing low-level stuff, and I know they can't help themselves. They have to just try and cram it into that Star Wars mold. And as I've said previously, I am so over these characters. I do not give a shit about Mando anymore. I don't give a shit about Baby Yoda. I just want someone to put him in a blender or something and just be done with him. He is just there as a cash cow. He's a marketing toy, basically. That's all he is.
Well, he's what got the whole thing off track, because they took the absolute wrong lesson from the first season. It was so great, and they were like, what everybody loved was this plushy toy selling machine. And so even though we kind of made it seem like we were getting rid of him, he somehow returned, and now he will be in the movie, in the title of the movie, because that's really what's important here, is selling those damn plushies.
That's become almost a synonymous moment with people losing interest with a TV franchise or show, is when Mando shows up with Grogu at the start of season 3, because so many people checked out when that happened. Because they saw the end of season 2 when he goes off with Luke, and a lot of people did tune in for the start of season 3. They were expecting to see Luke in it, and they thought that, okay, well, maybe Grogu will be with Luke, and then the Mando will be off doing his own thing, which will be a good thing, because you no longer have the tedium of having this little merchandising toy on screen who can't talk and who's very slow and who communicates very slowly, because it does get quite tedious quite quickly. It's a fun, cute little gimmick, but you do get over it and get bored of it quite quickly. So, and that was a great idea to get rid of him at the end of season 2, but no, they had to bring him back for their merchandising thing. And when people saw that, viewership went off a cliff. Season 3 of Mando it's already killed that sub-franchise. So as far as I'm concerned, it's too late for a movie, because the sub-franchise that is the Mandoverse is already dead. Season 3 was a complete debacle.
Yeah.
Well, we have two non-characters. Like, Mandalorian is the closest thing to a nondescript, non-actual character in terms of personality that you can get. And the Grogu thing, you don't know what his aptitude is. Sometimes he's aware of his circumstances and aware of how to intervene. At other times, he's just a goo-goo gaga infant who's helplessly, benignly unaware of what's going on. So it's all muddled. And I feel sorry for the special effects artists, because I was watching some old Mandalorian episodes the other day, and some of the special effects shots are gorgeous, of, the big spaceships and the spaceship porn and everything. But when you have the different Mandalorian clans talking to each other, it's just so brain dead.
Yeah.
Also, the facelessness of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Well, the thing that I don't, they're obviously not learning the lesson from the Marvels. where, I mean, there were multiple reasons that movie failed, and it was very predictable. But one big reason was that there was a character in Ms. Marvel that nobody had watched, nobody had seen, and there was a character in Monica Rambeau that nobody had seen unless you had, gotten 5-6 episodes into WandaVision. And so, you have these posters where 2 out of 3 characters no one knows. And so I think at this point, Mandalorian is recognizable enough in pop culture. Like, people have just seen headlines about him and they know that there is a thing called Mandalorian. So he's a very popular character, in kind of a fringe fashion. But you're going to make Filoni wants to make this Mandoverse movie, and he's relying on all of this Disney Plus watching in order to make it work. I mean, from the sounds of it, they want to tie together all of the recent stuff. So they want to have Ahsoka. People are going to see the movie poster, which is most assuredly going to have Bo-Katan front and center. It's going to have Ahsoka, and they're going to see these characters and go, who the fuck are these people? I've never heard of them. I don't know who these are. Who is this ugly looking bald guy? Boba Fett, that I don't know who this guy is. And I think they're going to have the exact same problem with the Marvels, where they're like, hey, come see this movie that you needed a subscription for, and you needed to watch about 27 hours of television for, so that we don't have to info dump at the beginning of the movie. And no one's going to show up for that.
I think they're very slowly learning that there's not a huge amount of cross-pollination between the TV show audience on Disney Plus and the general cinema-going audience. The people who watch Disney Plus shows, or the Star Wars ones, they will obviously have watched the movies, but a lot of the people watching the movies will not give a shit about the Disney Plus shows. It's, to put it in YouTube terms, it's like your audience for live streaming versus your audience for your general scripted videos. There is a huge gulf, and to expect that TV audience is going to be enough to support what's probably going to be like a $200 million movie is laughable. But then so is pretty much everything to do with Star Wars these days.
Just the colossal lack of imagination. I mean, Boba Fett was like this cool ancillary character who showed up for a little bit and looked awesome in Empire Strikes Back, and then was cool and awesome for a little bit in Return of the Jedi, and that was it. And then all this horse shit of Temuera Morrison and the prequel trilogy, and then all these TV shows where you've got a new Boba Fett guy called the Mandalorian, and then the actual Boba Fett guy. Temuera Morrison, he must be laughing his way to the bank with this absolute nonsense. Colossal creative redundancy. When he's on the back of that speeder bike going like a banther, he's literally just taking the piss out of this ridiculous, because he looks like he's a million years old, and he looks like he's 500 pounds in his white costume anyway. What a joke.
I mean, I think he definitely did drop some weight from when he was in Mando season 2 to having his own show. But yeah, he's clearly still an elderly man at this point and not really capable of doing the physical stuff. But hey, it gets him out the house for a while, so he's probably happy enough. Gives him something to do. But with this... Yeah, man, it's just like you mentioned before, Despot. I think the faceless characters of Mando, I think that's very emblematic of what Star Wars is now. It's like a brand without a personality. But I guess the point of it was that you could imprint yourself onto him. He was just your avatar type character, like the man with no name who could just go into dusty desert towns out in the Outer Rim and have some adventures that were self-contained and episodic. And, you can imagine yourself doing it. And that's all good stuff. But the problem is when you try to tie him into a bigger overarching storyline, he needs to then have a personality that matches with that. He needs to have a stake in it. And so you've kind of stuck in this awkward middle ground where they try to give him a personality, and dear old Pedro Pascal wants the world to see his glorious face at every possible opportunity, but the script doesn't really allow for it because the Mandalorian is not supposed to show his face. And so you've got essentially an unwinnable situation there. He's not compatible with what they're trying to make him do as a character.
He's also a pussified version of that Western archetype. Like your Clint Eastwood type is gritty, no bullshit, no nonsense, stoic, very critical, very cynical. And at the end of the film, they turn out to have a heart of gold and to do the right thing. Whereas this guy is just amenable. He's a nice guy who has friends, and he's got a nice little cause. So it's just such a watered down use of that Western aesthetic. And
Yeah.
it's nice to have, like, you can have the mask for 20 minutes in an episode, but if you've got a 2.5 hour long feature film with a masked guy, then after an hour that's going to pale and become kind of tedious. Do we think this is actually going to make money? Because there's going to be a huge audience for it, but it's just going to be like McDonald's. No one's going to come away from it, with the feels.
No,
It really
Let's do a
depends how
quick-
much they spend on it.
I mean,
Let's do a quick vote. Of all four of us, how many of us think this is going to make money? Echo? Will this make money?
I think it will. Yep, in a kind of, but make money in the sense that Minions makes money, not in the sense that a cultural spectacle makes money. So
Greg?
it's kind of sad.
No, I don't think so. Like I said, if you're pinning it to Disney Plus, and you figure when this opened up, I think it had 2 million people watch it, and I'm sure it's grown, so maybe 5 million people. If all 5 million of those people, even 10 million of those people, go out and buy a $20 movie ticket, that's at max $200 million. So you just don't have the mass appeal, you don't have the audience, and you're not going to rake in the money. I mean, if they do end up spending 250 million, which Disney tracker they absolutely will, they'll need every bit of $600 million to clear the break-even point, and they might get some licensing bits out of it, but no, they're not going to be in the black on this one if they come close to $200 million on the budget.
Yeah, I mean, knowing Lucasfilm, I think this thing would need to be like a maximum of $150 million to make a budget, and Lucasfilm are going to blow 200 to 300 million on it. This thing has Solo written all over it for me.
Yeah.
Good
I think so. The character doesn't even have the name recognition of Han Solo. This is just a character from a relatively small scale TV show on Disney Plus that fewer and fewer people are even interested in. I mean, when it's on Disney Plus, you're getting it almost for free each month anyway. Like what, $5 or something a month or whatever it costs, and you can access all of the Mandalorian. And even then, people aren't watching it. So ain't no way they're going to go to the movie theaters and pay like 4 or 5 times that to go see it. No way.
No, but they would have been better off to, like you had mentioned, like a Western, to basically do Kung Fu with David Carradine, and just a serial with him going from place to place, solving some problems. But they're addicted to their universes and their multiverses and their huge franchise thing. So everything has to be a sales pitch for the next thing. And this character, like you said, he's not going to carry that.
They tried initially, because you can see this with the movies, they tried to dip their toes into that Marvel extended universe model, where you got things like Rogue One, where you got Solo, a Star Wars story, where they were trying to spin it off with prequels and backstories to each of these characters, and it clearly did not work. And then the mainline movies pretty much tanked as well. When you're going from like $2 billion to like barely $1 billion in the space of 3 movies, that's not a good trajectory to be on. And so they then tried to repeat this model with the TV shows. They had the surprise success of The Mandalorian, which was done on a relatively small budget, and became this surprise hit. And like I said earlier, they tried to turn that into a launch pad for all these other shows like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like Ahsoka, like Boba Fett, endless stuff. And it's just the law of diminishing returns. Like the shows were poor quality. They were rushed, particularly with something like Boba Fett. Yes, Andor was pretty good quality and it took ages to make, but nobody fucking watched it because it was, again, there was no name recognition to it and it was pretty slow paced. So none of it's really working. They tried this model again and again with Star Wars. It should work, because there should be that universe of possibilities. Like if you've got an entire galaxy to play with, unlimited characters, planets, places you can go, adventures you can have, you could do anything. There should be that interest there. But the brand is so damaged now, and they've been so incompetent with every step of this process that they've taken, that they've devalued it to the point where nothing's really working anymore. I mean, I don't think the Acolyte's going to save Star Wars on TV somehow. Call me crazy, but
that's going to help our careers. But no, not them.
Yes,
it's such a shame, because there are so many Star Wars fans looking at Star Wars who've read a lot of the EU books and have played a lot of the video games, and they just think, man, just put me in a fucking writer's room and let me take this thing over. I could make it great. Man, it's so frustrating, because the potential, obviously, frustration is proportionate to potential, Like you watch something like, I don't know, The Idol. I think you mentioned that in one of your videos, Echo. And it's just dog shit. Like, there's no potential there. Like no one's going to be disappointed when they see that. No one's going to think, oh no, poor Lily Rose Depp isn't going to have a career like her dad. No one cares. But with Star Wars, it's endlessly frustrating because there are literally a canon that goes back 20,000, 25,000 years that to draw from. There's so much you could do with it. You could just scrap all the shit they're doing right now and start in a new timeline. And by timeline, I don't mean multiverse. I mean just go back 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Oh man, it does my head in. I can't stand it. And that was my favorite franchise as a kid.
Yeah. Well, it's called The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is the most unimaginative, obvious, tediously boring name imaginable. So I developed a little.
On the tin, I suppose.
So I developed a little competition, a little contest, where what I've done is I've taken great films from yesteryear with cool names, and what I've done is I've imagined that Lucasfilm created the title for the film. So it's the film, but the title is dumbed down and stupid, as if Lucasfilm had made it. So you have to tell me what the original film was based off the dumbed down, stupid one. So here's your first one.
Who wants to be the one to say it?
Dinosaur Forest.
So
Yeah,
What
Jurassic
was the
Park.
original? Yeah, Jurassic
Chris
Park.
Pratt. Chris Pratt, Part 4.
Yeah. Running
Chris
in
Pratt
shoes.
best.
Running in shoes. Yeah. Here we go.
Do you know what? Thank God. I almost want Disney to remake Back to the Future just to see if my predictions about it were correct.
Yeah.
Am I correct in saying, just before we go on with this, because I think these are great, but I was seeing an interview that they are remaking Wizard of Oz and It's a Wonderful Life, and they're gonna they're gonna be diverse characters. Basically, they're going to be all black, and the It's a Wonderful Life is going to be told from an LGBT perspective.
Well, I mean, that's what modern audiences have been asking for. Like, who hasn't watched It's a Wonderful Life? And
I know.
Do you know, it's a great movie, but the one thing it needs is LGBTQ2SIA plus representation.
And yeah, and you know, the main character has got to be black, and he should be a woman as well. And I just think, do it. I dare you. Try to remake one of literally the most beloved movies in the history of cinema and just see where it takes you. Go down that road and I'll be there to cheer you on every step of the way.
It's like they decided they went and they looked and okay, what is the most bedrock, rock solid, heterosexual white American film we can possibly find, and let's subvert that one. And that's the
I am offering odds of 10-1 on anyone who wants to bet against me that Disney won't make the Wicked Witch of the West an ambiguous villain with a tragic backstory.
Oh, yeah. It's the Wizard of Oz that manipulated her into being evil.
He was the bad guy the whole time.
I also think, Drinker, you were a little bit bigoted there because you mentioned the main character and their qualities, but you did not mention that they would be an amputee. And I think that your able privilege is kind of showing a little bit there.
If you remember the movie, he was deaf in one ear, so he is technically disabled already. So they did have that covered. That's it. You heard it here. It's a Wonderful Life is woke garbage.
Anyway, here's the next one.
I think I know this one. Oh, now I got it.
It should maybe be like Robot Assassin from the future. But
yeah,
I can go with this. Yeah.
No, Assassin would be too clever, so it has to be dumbed down.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Metal dude.
We've got the wacky Candyman.
The anti-racist Candyman.
Is that Willy Wonka?
Yeah, this next one might be a bit of a chin scratcher.
Cyber Chaos.
See if the chat can get it first.
It's not
Cyber. No, not Tron. Cyber Chaos. Yes, Alex Ashkin has got it. It's the Matrix.
Oh, okay.
That came out last year. I thought that feels like it came out 2-3 years ago.
Well, the original, the
Oh.
1999 Spectacular.
Jesus Christ! I watched the Matrix regurgitated recently, and fuck me,
Mhm.
That's a journey, isn't it?
that was just.
It really is.
It's. Do you know what it is? It's a weird kind of meta movie because the director, the writer director, which is one of the Wachowskis, knows that it's terrible. And it's in the movie. Like this, they're screaming at the camera, this is just a garbage remake.
Yeah.
It's so weird. I'm watching a movie where the director is telling me this thing is awful. I know it's awful, and you know it's awful, and on we go. It's so
I mean,
strange.
I could have forgiven it if it was like that initial meta reference, and then it transitions into, oh, actually, this is a really compelling and interesting spin on the Matrix. Like they do something really cool and clever. But no, it just is legit trash all the way through. And like just shining a light on your own failure doesn't make it any less of a failure. I don't really understand what you're trying to accomplish by doing that.
I was trying to wrap my head around it. I was like, okay, what is Wachowski trying to say with this? Is it it couldn't be this is great because it's so meta, like the whole Velma thing. It couldn't be that. It's too shit. It's too obvious to try to be saving itself with meta commentary. I think it was just a self-confession. I would guess, because if you're at least intelligent enough to have made the first Matrix movie, and there are redeeming elements of the other two, you must know that the third one's trash, and you're coming back just for the money, and you want to let the audience know. And maybe it was also, I was thinking maybe it was kind of a self-parody, but also a parody of reboots. It was trying to be a parody of reboots and a meta commentary and a Matrix movie. It is a strange movie.
I think you're giving them too much credit. I just think I think a lot of people think that some of these things are clever. Like they think hanging the lampshade is clever, and it can be.
I don't think that's clever. I don't think
means.
meta. I think meta's massively overused. I think it's played out, and I don't think it's particularly clever anymore. I think meta can be very clever, but it has to be done well. Like David Lynch, Twin Peaks. That's clever. That's clever. That's meta done very clever, but that's not how they do it now. Now it's very fourth wall breaking.
Yeah,
if the meta is like, isn't everything that we make shit? It's like, well, yeah, it is. But if what you made actually is shit on top of that, then I'm not going to have too much sympathy for you. I mean, was it something as simple as, if I don't make this movie, then the studio's just going to hire someone with even less talent to make it, and so I'd rather just give it a Viking's funeral and absolutely shit on this project because I can, and couch it in this like weird meta reference humor thing that the studio execs just won't get. I don't know. Oh God, the witches of Dathomir.
Their idea of meta is to just have one character say something about, if this were this isn't a movie, we can't do that. That's as far as they get with meta. Oh God.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about Kathleen there. We were talking on Open Bar about the ridiculous slate of projects that are sort of have treatments that are sort of in circulation, that have got scripts maybe going, that have been assigned to directors. And it's creeping up probably towards a dozen of them now, or the best part of a dozen. And my thought was just the other day that when Walt Disney was walking through the halls of the company, he would whistle as a way to sort of make people know that he's approaching the room, and everyone would tense up because it's the boss, it's the guy. And he would come across as totally amenable, this avuncular, lovely, warm figure on the screen. But he was ruthless, and the key word, discipline. Before anything would go out into the public sphere, everything would be absolutely nailed down, locked down, the strategy, the program, 100% under control. And so modern Disney is the absolute opposite of that, with shows going back for massive reshoots, with this display of ridiculous projects getting floated out into the culture, almost as if Lucasfilm is saying, do you like this one? What do you think about this one? We're maybe thinking about this one. What do you think about that? Which is a very passive and very messy way of doing things. So I don't know why Kathleen Kennedy still has a job.
I am convinced that, like, if she was a man, or if she didn't have the history that she has within Hollywood of essentially riding on the coattails of guys like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, she would have been out of a job like several years ago. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. She either knows too many powerful people, or she knows too many unpleasant secrets, or she's just too she's considered like royalty within Hollywood, and nobody's got the balls to fire her. And potentially not many people want to take her job on, because it's a pretty thankless task to try and save Lucasfilm at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But it's depressing.
It is, because, you know, we've talked about this a lot over the past couple of years. You know, the degree of brand destruction that we've seen, partly with things like Marvel, and especially with Star Wars, which was essentially pop culture, the first massive pop culture brand that we ever saw. See it just sunk in the space of just a few years through sheer incompetence and ego and hubris is an impressive feat, if nothing else. But man, I just can't wait for the day when, you know, all of those NDAs are lifted and all those people who've been too spineless to speak up actually give their real thoughts on people like her and their tenure and what they've done to properties like this, because I think it'll be a bloodbath.
She's just got to know. She's got to know something. What I find odd is that Iger, I mean, must have known that he was on his way out in 2018, and he renewed her contract. And I would think if anybody was going to let her go, it would have been him, as he was kind of considering the end of his career. And who cares? I got nothing to lose. And both the first two movies of the trilogy had come out at that point, and he had seen the 25% gross drop off from the first movie to the second movie, and renewed her contract anyway. And of all the mistakes that he's made, I think that is the biggest one.
Well, to be fair, if you look at that from his perspective at that time, like, he's just the CEO. His job, you know, nominally his job is to make money, although actually he's really more of an ideologue. But
well, he's made 35 million for himself this year.
Whew.
Yeah, at that time,
it was a tough year.
The Force Awakens was tremendously successful. It made over $2 billion. And The Last Jedi, as bad as it was, made over $1 billion. And they had also released, I think, Rogue One at that time, and that had made over $1 billion. So with that kind of success behind her, like $3 billion, like she made $4 billion with 3 movies. I don't think any CEO would have could have really justified firing her at that stage. Now, she was obviously able to generate that income off the back of just how hot the Star Wars brand was when it came back. That's really where that money was coming from. It's nothing that she had generated. It was George Lucas really that made that money, but she got the credit for it. And yeah, I don't think you could have fired her at that stage as a CEO. You would have been accused of fiduciary irresponsibility.
Well, I think the failure of Solo, I think, sent a real shockwave through the company, because that was the first high-profile flop that they'd experienced, and that, I think, was the point where they started to question, okay, what's up with this brand? Because that, combined with Rise of Skywalker, just barely clearing $1 billion, and it's laughable that we're talking, you know, oh, this movie just made over $1 billion, and you know that seems like a bad return. But you have to remember, they spent an insane amount of money on that film. Like, I thought it was around the $300 million mark. From what I was seeing online now, when it's adjusted for all the reshoots and stuff that they had to do, it's closer to 400 million. It didn't even... if you do the 3 times multiplier, then it didn't really even break even. That is terrifying for such income. And that would be the point where they would start to think, okay, maybe we need a change of leadership here. But then you had The Mandalorian come along, and it be a surprise success on Disney Plus at a time when everything had become shut down. The movie theaters were shut down because of the pandemic, and it seemed like Disney Plus streaming was going to be the way forward. And hey, if we've got a super successful Star Wars show on our premiere service that's just launching, that seems like a winner. And so maybe she's redeemed herself a little bit with this one. Obviously, that's petered out now as well. And I, as far as I understand it, her contract now runs out in the autumn this year, towards the end of this year. And I don't think she's trying to renew it. So it's going to be a very like dignified, well-ordered exit for her, and she'll get all the accolades that you can imagine. And yeah, everyone will just kind of quietly forget all the things that got screwed up and failed under her tenure.
You would imagine that the stuff that the Lucasfilm are working on at the minute, it's basically just going to get scrapped. And that if Iger doesn't want to kick up too much of a fuss, he's just going to kick the can down the road until she's gone.
I think so. Yeah, like Muller and I had discussed this a few times on Open Bar. It seems like the Rey movie is the one that they're going to try and fast track and get it. They want to get it so far through production that it would be financially unfeasible to cancel it at that point because they'll have spent so much on pre-production and all that stuff. And I think if I was Kathleen Kennedy, I would probably want that Rey movie out there just to get one more film with my my baby, you know, the character that I clearly care a great deal about, and I just want to cement her legacy in Star Wars history by giving her like this big gap, and she's going to pass on the torch to the next generation of Jedi, and she's going to become the new Luke Skywalker. That's seemingly her goal with this. But yeah,
will they have a scene where she unearths those lightsabers that she buried in the sand at the end of the Rise of Skywalker? Will that be like
she'll just make new ones with the power of her girl bossness? But yeah, like from a purely financial perspective, if I was brought in as the new CEO of Lucasfilm, I would shit can that movie immediately, and basically every other movie that's in production under Kennedy, because they're not going to make money. You're just going to lose more money for the studio. And at what point do you just say we're wasting our resources here?
There's a paragraph here, and it makes me wonder when they're hiring writers for these trade magazines for entertainment, is the criteria that are you able to write in a chirpy, benign way, in an almost context-free style of writing. So I'm just going to emphasize the ambiguous words in this paragraph. The most recent confirmation of the movie's development from Lucasfilm could signal that more news is on the horizon. Knight may soon finish his final draft, which Ridley has called a really cool way of taking the story on. The actress has recently been speaking about the movies more frequently during her press tour for another movie, and this, along with Abe Chenoy's words earlier this year, seem to hint that new Jedi Order may soon begin production. Abe Chenoy's phrasing in her update implied that production was moving along, and as the movie develops, more news is sure to come.
Something is happening somewhere that may be related to this movie.
Almost context-free paragraph, but in a chirpy kind of positive tone. It's amazing to write like that.
It's brilliant. That guy could be a fantastic propagandist.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
like he should be working on a presidential campaign or something.
How to make absolutely nothing sound like something significant in some vague way.
This is 90% of online copy these days. It's just hard to parse through.
But a Soviet propagandist, like there may have been something to do with some kind of meltdown at the Chernobyl plant. It could be something that may possibly the authorities were implying that. So yeah. But God, so that's where we're at with dear old Lucasfilm.
I am so dubious about the production status of this film, though, because they claimed that they're going to go into active production in May. That's when they're going to start shooting potentially. It's now late January.
Are they actually manufacturing assets? Like, are the production designers manufacturing the assets for the movie as we speak? I mean,
who
if there's
knows?
No script. It's
how,
weird.
How can you make sets and
script?
stuff if you don't have a script? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
you need a script, like a solid script, written and pretty much ready to go, at least a year before you shoot, because it goes through revisions. It has to get approval from the studio. The actors have to go through it. Like this stuff cannot be thrown together in the space of a few months.
Oh, that's what you think.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
it can be, and it will show.
Even with Disney, there are legal considerations. When you're making a movie that big, you have to copyright the script, and it has to go through your legal department to make sure everything's nice and tidy. And then you've got your revision. It takes a long time. So it's very hard to imagine that it does get made. If it does get made, it would be the most haphazard ad hoc shite. I'd love it if they made it. Like, I really want this movie made. Disney need to release a Star Wars movie into theaters so that it will flop and it will confirm that Star Wars is a dead franchise. That needs to happen. I think the culture needs that, and I hope it happens.
I think we're going to see something similar to what we saw with the Marvels, where again there was this very successful, financially successful movie that came out at just the right time, capitalized on a whole bunch of extremely favorable market factors to become successful. And the question was always, well, can it stand on its own 2 feet? You know, when it doesn't have like all these hugely successful other movies to support it, and when it's not protected by the studio, it just has to stand on its own merits. Can it do it? And we all said it wouldn't, and it absolutely didn't, and it failed in spectacular fashion. And I think this is probably going to be the same for Rey, because everyone knows it's just a Rey movie. It's not like a continuation of the main narrative. It's not going to have Luke Skywalker in it. It's not going to have Han Solo or Leia or Chewie, or maybe Chewie, actually. He might be roped in. But it's not going to have any of those recognizable things in it. It's just going to be about Rey. And nobody gives a shit about Rey.
Are we, the last I heard, the rumors from months ago was that it was going to be, 15 years in the future, and Rey has Kylo's babies, and she has twins, and that's like the premise of the movie. Is that still the working?
Oh, I know. So they're going for a whole
plot leak.
Is it like a single mom drama now? Like, she lives on the second floor of a tenement building and she's working, 2 jobs, and she's got 2 kids. She's a single mom. Are they going for an Oscar? Is that what's happening?
She's going to rebuild the Jedi Order without the holy texts or whatever. I guess she just makes it up as she goes. But I looked online.
She doesn't need the text because she just knows everything already.
Yeah.
Well, this is new to me, this what if thing. I didn't know that there was this Marvel what if show, like some kind of animated show, which basically just speculates, whimsically on different scenarios that could happen in that extended universe. What would it be like if you flipped it around like this? And what would it be like if this character was actually evil? Which sort of makes sense in the context of a universe which has a multiverse. That kind of makes sense. But the idea that Star Wars could be doing this, which doesn't have the leavening effect of a multiverse, seems ridiculous. Like, what if Luke Skywalker had turned to the dark side or whatever? So this has the mentality for me of a kid playing with his toys who just mashes random toys from different things together and creates his own little playlets in his mind. But that's not entertainment. That's not creativity. This is a cat pouring in its own litter box. So, thoughts?
It is, in the sense that, I mean, and I will speak in defense of what if from the Marvel perspective, in that it's actually kind of interesting, and I think some of them are fairly decently done. I think actually some of the writing is better than what you got in the mainline movies. Like, they're pretty entertaining, and they come across as generally quite even-handed. But like you say, this is a universe that's quite heavily invested in multiverses and different realities and stuff. Like, Star Wars has always been much more linear like that. But it could be seen as the first little step towards having time travel or branching storylines or full-on alternate realities within the universe of Star Wars. Because it seems like Dave Filoni particularly is willing to experiment pretty heavily with that sort of thing, with his crazy like world between worlds stuff.
Space whales.
And so, yeah, you might just see this as a little test bed. And if it's like super successful, then they'll move forward with more concrete stuff within the movies. I think that's generally the mindset.
This strikes me as a kind of reasonably low budget weather balloon that Disney will send up to see, well, how will audiences respond to this storyline or this character? Disney love doing that stuff. They're all about their data and their statistics and their analytics. So it's probably something like that. It almost suggests to me that they're really not sure where to take Star Wars, and they're throwing out this show basically to gather some data. It's almost like a little probe droid that they're sending into the fandom.
Yeah.
Before they launch their next massive attack on what's left of the franchise.
Yeah, I hate to disagree on the what if stuff. I wasn't a fan of it. I didn't even watch the second season because I didn't like. To me, I have little kids, and I get these questions all the time from them. They just ask me random, like my kid will run up to me and go, "Hey, what if we lived in a volcano? What if that happened?" And I'm just like, I don't know, And then I'm like, it'd be pretty hot, buddy, wouldn't it? And he's like, yeah, it would. And he runs off. Like, that's the kind of, I get those conversations a lot. And that, to me, that feels like what the what if thing was. They were like, just, what if Captain America, but she was a girl? What would happen? And it's like that on the surface feels like an interesting question. And I guess with the multiverse thing, that's fine. What bothers me with the Star Wars angle is that Disney bought all of the extended universe, so they don't have to ask silly questions like, what if Luke went to the dark side? What if Luke and Kylo Ren actually kissed each other and there was a gay fanfic or something? Like, they don't have to ask those kind of questions because they have an entire universe full of short stories. And rather than do a what if the thing but slightly different, why not just tell filler stories that really could not stand on their own, but maybe a season of them? Let's just do a day in the life of Greedo before Han shoots him. Let's do like some Mandalorian. Let's do a Mandalorian mission. A group of Mandalorians is going about a bounty or something to that effect. Like some of these smaller stories that sort of fill in the world building of the Star Wars universe, without having to make an interconnected multiverse, without having to do branching stories, without having to reimagine existing characters. And they already own all of that stuff and refuse to use any of it. And it makes me crazy.
It's a good question. Could Luke Skywalker lift Thor's hammer?
To be honest, what if could work? It could work as a legitimately decent TV show, but it can't be milk toast. I think that's the problem with the Marvel one. It's too, well, instead of Steve Rogers being Captain America, it's gonna be this Carter woman. She's gonna be Captain America, and it's too milk toast. Like, it needs to be batshit off the wall insane. Like,
I mean,
what
it
if
does.
Luke Skywalker was a junkie homosexual degenerate, and he goes to orgies and stuff, and Leia has to go there and says, "Luke, well, you can't be doing this to your family," and then they have an intervention. Like, it needs to be that, and they also have lightsaber fights, and you've got the whole Star Wars aesthetic. It should be surreal. If you're going to make something surreal, really make it surreal. Really go for it. Now, obviously, Disney would never do that. I'm just saying that conceptually, it's not a bad idea, but it needs to be batshit off the wall insane to work.
I don't know if I'm not big on comic sales. Like, I don't track the stuff, but I do know that they've done that stuff. And you're right. It would have to be a little bit gross. It would have to be a little R-rated, which I don't think goes with Disney's branding. So I think they should not do that. But I know, like, in the comics, there have been violent Batman iterate. Like, there was a vampire Batman I read about once. It was just like a one-off comic where he just murdered everybody, including Alfred, bit everybody. He was crazy. And then the comic ended. And it was kind of a what if type thing. But it was insane. But I don't know if anybody in the chat knows about that one, or like how well those did. Like, do those sell good, those one-off stories like that? Is the audience actually interested in watching that? Or is that the kind of thing that you talk about with your buddies and it sounds cool, but you wouldn't really want to watch a lot of that?
I think the more off the wall it gets, the more the audience is going to fall away, because it's going to become so specific that it's like, down to like just a group of people who are curious about a really specific thing. Like, I think the way the Marvels ones did it relatively successfully was like, what if Ultron actually succeeded and defeated the Avengers? And he, like, I'm sure in his episode, he ends up fucking destroying all life in the universe, and even like bursting out of his own reality to destroy the Watcher who governs all this stuff. Like, it gets to quite extreme degrees. But again,
well, they tried it in Star Trek, where they had like the fascist alternative reality, and it just looked corny.
Universe,
it just looked corny and stupid. So this kind of stuff is fine in the realm of the imagination, but you don't green light this stuff. You don't turn it into actual content and product. It's not where it belongs. It's feeble
you do
and brittle.
If you're desperate to make money and you're desperate to just fill release slots, and you've got
I mean, they have it's content. It's just content, and Disney.
Well, maybe they could use
content.
it as a great outlet. So if there's identity junkies who turn up to Lucasfilm, welcome to Lucasfilm. Welcome on board as a writer. and you find out that they're identity driven about everything, then saying, well, we've got a special room for you and a special project where we think you're going to fit in nicely. So you just shove all those people into making this particular bit of crap, and then you siphon them out. So maybe that could be a good strategy.
That's called busy work. Corporations do it when they hire box tickers. So they need, whenever the government inspectors come around or whenever the press come around, they need to be able to say, okay, so 7% of our staff are black, you know, if they're living in Northern England or something. What they'll do is they'll give them busy work. So you basically shove them in a cupboard and say, here, fill out this spreadsheet. And it's meaningless work. And the idea is that you just put them somewhere where they're not going to do too much damage to the company. But Disney doesn't do that. Disney I mean, we've seen this with the Marvels. Disney genuinely give important jobs to box tickers, and it creates massive damage. Yeah.
Well, speaking of massive damage and box tickers and general crap, oh no, Drinker, everyone was annoyed that you didn't get what's his face to do that iconic. Oh no,
Dankula, yeah. Oh no, how terrible! Oh, how did this? Oh no.
So my thoughts were that you can have, if you're outside the system and outside the product and you don't have the keys to make stuff, then your grievances are 100% warranted. It's not especially nice to listen to, but they're warranted as grievances. But if you've been given the keys and literally given $250 million to be inside the system, greenlit to do and make whatever you want, and you're still exuding an attitude of grievance and disgruntledness about things, then it comes across as incredibly grating. And so there's an antagonism there, and even worse, a preemptive antagonism about how people are going to react to your product. And so grievance and antagonism are anti-comedy. And if that's the basic DNA, which is at the heart of your show, then it's just going to be a nuclear disaster in terms of content. So bye-bye She-Hulk, we won't miss you.
Here's a quick question, just for you three. Can comedy work if it's angry?
Yes, if it's spluttering and exaggerated and silly, like in Seinfeld, that kind of comedy, because it's an out of control when you're overreacting to conventional stuff. So that can be funny. But generally, if you're grievance driven, that's slightly different. And grievance is never funny.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to come across as funny when you're literally screaming at your audience in rage. Like that's crosses a line, I think, and then it's no longer amusing. It's just like depressing and irritating to listen to. I think the best format of comedy when it comes to mocking things is a kind of detached, like just, you know, I'm going to sit back with my beer and just laugh at how dumb this thing is. And you've just got this kind of dry sense of humor about it. I think that's the way that works best with this sort of thing. But with something like She-Hulk, yeah, the resentment and the antagonism was palpable in what they'd created. And I don't know why they acted like it was some kind of epic win or that they owned the haters by saying, we produced, see, you predicted that we would make a crappy show, and we did, but it was crappy on purpose to make fun of you so that you would... Yeah, so that you would get angry about it. Like, well done, I guess. Like, you just blew $250 million on nothing.
That's actually what Tatiana Maslany said in a recent interview, and this is verbatim. She said, "We blew our budget," like, and that's the word we blew it. So she kind of knows that it was shit. And I think that at the time she might have enjoyed it. She would have been on that dopamine high of making a show, but afterwards the anger probably set in, and she probably thought, these moron showrunners fucked away $250 million on one season of shite, and now I'm out of work. Like, she's probably quite angry about it, and you know, I don't blame her. Yeah,
because, you know, as much as the show was garbage, like, I don't think it was because of her. Like, I think she did the best with what she was given. She seems like a reasonable enough actress. But she's going to be tarred with that brush now and associated with this thing. And, you know, as much as they always paint a rosy picture on the surface, like, behind closed doors, people know when shows like this have been wildly unpopular. They do know. And the people associated with it, the writers, the showrunners, the actresses, that is a black mark on their career. And some of them never recover from it. So, yeah, she should be angry because she was probably roped into doing something that she thought was going to be super fun and successful. And it was neither of those things.
Well, I'm going to try and tap dance through a minefield here. Okay. Right. So Christopher Hitchens. You all know Christopher Hitchens?
Yeah.
So on Open Bar, maybe like a month ago, one guest, I can't remember who it was, just sort of blurted out, I think half drunkenly, that women have ruined entertainment. And there was like a silence of social static where no one quite assented to it. But it did trigger, it reminded me of something. And Christopher Hitchens wrote an article in Vanity Fair from 2007 titled, kind of ironically and performatively as Why Women Aren't Funny. And so here's some excerpts from it that I wanted to look at. Why are men, taken on average and as a whole, funnier than women? Well, for one thing, they had damn well better be. The chief task in life that a man has to perform is that of impressing the opposite sex. An average man has just one outside chance. He had better be able to make the lady laugh. Women have no corresponding need to appeal to men in this way. They already appeal to men. This is not to say that women cannot make great wits and comedians. Most of them, though, when you come to review the situation, are hefty or lesbian or Jewish, or some combo of the three. And the lesbian faction may have its own reasons for wanting what I want, the sweet surrender of female laughter. While Jewish humor, boiling as it is with angst and self-deprecation, is almost masculine by definition. For women, reproduction is, if not the only thing, certainly a key thing. Apart from giving them a very different attitude to filth and embarrassment, it also imbues them with the kind of seriousness and solemnity at which men can only goggle. In other words, for women, the question of funniness is essentially a secondary one. They are innately aware of a higher calling that is no laughing matter. Those who risk agony and death to bring children into this fiasco simply can't afford to be too frivolous. So he's being ironical, he's being performative, but is there maybe like a tiny little grain of truth in there as well?
I think there's actually a great deal of truth to that, and I've experienced this personally as a teacher. So I've taught hundreds of teenage boys over the years, and I'll be in a classroom with boys and girls, and you will see the boys try to be funny in an attempt to impress the girls, and they can be quite annoying. But once you realize that it's almost like their biological programming getting them to come up with very primitive types of humor. So like they'll mock something the teacher is wearing. It's like, teacher, your tie is spotty. It's very primitive. It's not funny, but they're coming into their humor. Their humor is improving over time. And I'm sure, we've all experienced that ourselves. You look back to what you did as a teenager or when you were in university or whatever, and you cringe, but that's just what a man does. A man has to develop a good sense of humor to attract women. I think it's almost biologically inbuilt. And by on the other side of that coin, it's very rare that girls would try to be funny in class, especially at like maybe pre-adolescent, but once they get into their teenage years, their sort of sexual becoming, they're much less interested in trying to make anybody laugh. It's always the boys cracking jokes in an attempt to impress the girls.
If it's speech time in a class and everyone has to deliver like a 3-minute speech, none of the girls' speeches in that class will be particularly funny, but there'll be 2 or 3 boys who will just make a laugh out loud, dumb performative speech to try and impress everyone.
I think the key element of what humor is it's a transaction. When you really boil it down to its key element, it's you trying to sell something to another person. And in this case, it's the joke. You're trying to present that piece of humor to them, and in return, you're trying to earn a laugh from them. So it's a give and take kind of situation. And kind of what Despot was saying here, there's not really a need for girls to do that in order to impress guys, because generally guys are the ones who try to impress the girls, and they do that through that transaction of humor, of trying to sell the humor to them, and by extension, in a way, they're trying to sell themselves as something that is going to be appealing to them. Girls don't need to do it, and so they perhaps don't get as much practice at doing it. And I think the other aspect of it is it really requires a confidence to be able to do, because you have to essentially take command of that conversation if you're going to crack a joke, and you have to demand the person's attention. You have to get it off them so that they can focus on you. You have to give that joke to them. You have to deliver it to them and sell it to them in a way that they're going to appreciate. And it's their choice if they're going to laugh at it. And again, I just don't think girls are often in that position where they have to put themselves out there like that and try and sell that aspect of themselves.
Well, you also
which is a
mentioned
really boring and dry academic way of trying to boil it down. But it did get me thinking there of like, what is the essence and what is the point of being funny or trying to be funny? And it's a kind of like social transaction, I guess. That's ultimately what humor is.
I think a lot of times somebody mentioned that there's like trial and error involved in humor, and yeah, boys are doing it from a younger age and all that. And I think something that I've noticed with female comics, I think a handicap is that they can get really quick success with the same type of joke, especially if she's like a small girl comedian. The juxtaposition of her being small and dainty and having a high voice, and then she'll tell just the nastiest jokes that you've ever heard. And the shock factor of that, I think Amy Schumer is just the peak of this right here. Like her entire shtick was just like, hey guys, I'm going to say the nastiest sex jokes you've ever heard. And I'm just going to talk about how much I love dick. And it was it's funny because, hey, girls don't usually say stuff like that. And I think they kind of ride that and they get the success with it. And they don't really explore, generally don't have to explore other forms of humor. And so that's the whole shtick. And then it gets old and then they got
that's an interesting point you make there, because there's always that kind of stereotype, I guess, that when you do have a female stand-up, pretty much all their act is based around sex and relationships. And there's not really much else that they cover. And you could perhaps make the argument then, or it leads to this stereotype that they're terribly unimaginative creatures when it comes to comedy. And I don't know how much truth there is in it, but when I think about the female stand-ups that I've seen at festivals and stuff, all of their acts do seem to be about that. It's an odd one. Whereas like there's a bit more, I guess, range of stuff with the male comedians. Not necessarily saying that they're all super funny or anything. It's just that they seem more willing to branch out into different things to try and pull comedy out of that.
There's also a negative aspect, which is in our society, quite sadly, a lot of girls might be told by their mothers in particular that, don't be too funny or too expressive because men can find that intimidating. So I think that's a negative aspect. But so if you take that little dynamic as one little element, and then you take grievance and resentment as another little element, and then you take a disproportionate focus on identity, and you swirl all those three things together, then you get stuff like Velma and She-Hulk.
And Hannah Gadsby.
Yeah, so that's, I think, the reason why these things just are so prickly for people. It's that mixture of those three things.
Yeah,
Velma was a truly baffling show. Not even like, when I look back on it, I'm not even like pissed off at it or anything. I'm more just confused as to what they thought they were going to achieve with a show like that. Because
I'm fairly certain they felt that they were going to get backlash, but they thought it was only going to come from people that didn't matter. Basically, white men and basement-dwelling incels. That's what they thought, but they would get a lot of support. Maybe the left wing of the cultural spectrum would rally to them. And they get a lot of support that way. I think that's what they thought was going to happen, but that's not what happened.
I don't know. I think some of it is Mindy Kaling has made an entire career out of that same type of comedy. I mean, if you look at all of her characters, the Mindy Project, Kelly Kapoor from The Office, I think there was another one that I can't remember. She wrote another show, but her character has always been that. Like she is super annoying and says out loud how annoying she is. So again, it's that hanging the lampshade thing. If I say that I'm annoying, that it absolves me of being annoying, but it doesn't. And also all of her characters are really slutty, and that's supposed to be very funny as well, that she sleeps around a lot, and that's a butt of a ton of the jokes. And so yeah, Velma was the culmination of that and her hatred of the patriarchy. And so it was, dick jokes on Fred. It was, slutty jokes on all the girls in high school. It was all of the things that Mindy Kaling does all the time. And they haven't been funny, and they all came together in this just singularity of Mindy Kaling, and it was awful.
Yeah, I mean, you throw a bunch of race swaps into that as well, which were, I mean, the race swaps in Velma were so bizarre and over the top. It's almost like it was parodying race swaps. Like it was a South Park episode. South Park did it in the Pandaverse. They race swapped all their own characters to make fun of this stupid, fucking ridiculous bad habit that Hollywood is falling into of race swapping all the characters. And it was beautiful, necessary parody. Velma was like that, but Velma was serious about it.
Yeah.
They wanted these race swaps to be taken seriously. It was so absurd. It's such an odd, bizarre little cultural moment.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
like I think you guys said
Yeah, go
earlier,
ahead, Greg.
you can be angry, but you just can't be angry at your audience. I think that's the big difference is, you know, Sam Kinison screamed and he was funny, but he was screaming at other things. Lewis Black made an entire career out of being angry, but he was angry at, you know, daily activities that we're all angry at. We were angry with him. And even when you go see a comedian who works the crowd and makes fun of them, that works in a comedy club when you know that you're there and you're sitting in the front, you're sitting by the stage, you know, you're going to get picked out. You're there for that, right? Like that was, I think, another issue is that you have to set the tone. And I mean, we did know from the trailer they put out that this was going to be a bitter, horrible mess. But I think most people tuning in did not think that it wasn't the setting of a comedy club where the guy is going to work the crowd and maybe make fun of your shirt or whatever to get the crowd going. That it's a different setting. And so it just was very bitter, and it just hated the people that were watching it. And then they quit watching it, and everyone was somehow surprised by that.
Well, hopefully there'll be a culture or a sea change, but I doubt it. So gird yourself because we're going for the big one. Oh boy. Okay. Aye.
Oh no, is this the question? Which one's been trashed more?
Yes. Which property has been wrecked the worst? So settle in because we're going to be here for a while. Okay, let's just go around the horn. Greg, which franchise?
You know, it's a tough one.
It is.
And I'm gonna pick, even though I know a little bit about it, and I've been watching it because I want to make a video about it. I'm gonna go with Doctor Who. I think Doctor Who has been torn up the most because I think Star Trek always was kind of it wasn't like political commentary, but it was always like a future utopia where everybody gets along. And so it being used now to sell social propaganda is kind of in line with what it was. It's just a little more extreme, and it's much more left wing. I think Star Wars has been shitty for so many years that I think we're all kind of numb to it. But Doctor Who, from my understanding, and I hope I don't sound ignorant because I really don't know a ton about it, but it was always kind of silly. It was just good fun. It's British humor. It's sci-fi. It's a guy eating a bowl of custard and fish fingers because he doesn't remember who he really is. And it's just silly stuff. And then they took it with these specials and they were like, we're going to try to, with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, we're going to cram as many social messages, and we are just going to use this as a vehicle to scream what we want at the audience. And it took away all the whimsy and all the fun and all the goofiness. And I think my understanding is those are kind of the legs that Doctor Who is built on, and they just kicked them out. And I think that's it suffered the worst death in my opinion.
All right. Despot, which one are you opting for?
I'm going to speak in purely commercial, financial terms because I'm a capitalist swine and I love it. Star Wars. Star Wars, it's easy almost to forget just how big Star Wars was. If you look at when Episode 1 came out in 1999, or even when The Force Awakens came out, those were giant cultural movements. I mean, this franchise was massive. It generated huge amounts of money, and not just the movies, the books, the video games, the merchandise. It was giant. And it has been turned into this pathetic, trashed franchise. People won't show up for it on Disney Plus. It can't even get a fucking movie into theaters anymore. And if it did, everybody thinks it would flop, right? Yeah. If you were to line up, 100 movie YouTubers and ask how many of you think this next Star Wars movie is going to do well in cinema, you'll see very few hands raised, right? That's astonishing for Star Wars to take such a successful franchise and turn it into such a commercially worthless, just smoking ruin of rubble. It's an astonishing feat in and of itself.
Well, I agree. Drinker, where do you land?
Well, just to do a quick round the houses, I suppose, out of all of these, Lord of the Rings has probably been the least damaged. Like, Rings of Power was garbage, but I think it was so roundly rejected by the fan base that it's not even had a chance to get a foothold on what Lord of the Rings is. So for the most part, I feel like that's still doing relatively well. It's definitely taken a few hits, but it's hanging in there. Star Trek, it's been on rocky ground for quite some time now. You know, even going back to like the Star Trek Enterprise days, like it's had a lot of difficulties. And so it feels like it's just going through another spell like that. They're still producing lots of shows. They're mostly crap, but like Greg was saying, like Star Trek has always been about pushing social progressivism and a lot of political ideology. It's just that it used to be a lot smarter about it, and the things it was trying to push made a lot more sense. And so it's just kind of doing what it did before, but it's just gotten so extreme that it's failing now. But yeah, they can't get movies off the ground, so they're in bad condition. In terms of the thing that's fallen the furthest, it's got to be Star Wars. That has gone from being a pop culture like juggernaut that really defined nerd culture for decades to a bunch of obscure TV shows on a streaming platform, and it's all due to like sheer mismanagement. So that's fallen the furthest. But I think in absolute terms, yeah, I'd agree. Doctor Who is probably the one that's been trashed the most. It is just a joke at this point. It used to be, this quirky, lighthearted British take on sci-fi. The Doctor was this eccentric, the classic tradition of the British eccentric, the kind of guy who wears the cricket outfit with the piece of celery in the lapel, just odd stuff like that. But it was well-meaning and it was fun and it was different. Now it is just, if you think you have seen identity politics, and if you think you have seen wokeness, you have not seen it until you've watched BBC productions. They do it in a way that would make even the most hardcore left-wing American productions blush with shame. And so, yeah, that is by far the worst out of the four, I would say.
Well, I'm going Doctor Who as well, and for pretty much the same reason that you touched upon. And I'm going to go into it here for a little bit. The key for me about Doctor Who is there's something intrinsically post-war Britain about it, and a very type of British eccentricity, which I'd even go slightly further to say is a kind of dottiness. So basically, it's a show made by clever adults for clever 10-year-olds, and you're going on big adventures with your uncle/grandfather. And the whole idea is that the grandfather has a particular type of, he's brilliant, but he also has a kind of eccentricity, which is very English. So here's the kind of post-war British kind of culture from which I sort of align all this stuff. And I just wrote down random stuff. It's quite a long list. Morris Minors, Village Fates, Bakelite radios, BBC radio dramas, flock wallpaper, cardigans, wellies, tweed jackets with leather patches at the elbows, Wurzel Gummidge, Wombles of Wimbledon Common, Enid Blyton, Roald Dahl, Bubble and Squeak, Pigs in a Blanket, choral groups travelling by coach, sherbet, licorice laces and Oxfordshire toffees, earnest local vicars, Ealing film toffs, and panto. And from that world, you get a doctor who like has those little affectations, like he drives a 1920s roadster, or he has a huge long scarf, and he's got slightly bug-eyed and kind of weird kind of way, or he has the sprig of celery and he wears the cricket costume. It's so intrinsically English, and it's subtle, and it's sweet, and it's a bit dotty. And so the new Doctor Who has the worst possible thing you could imagine. Pizzazz. There's dance and singing numbers, and there's high-octane energy and identity politics that is so absolute for almost every single character in every episode that it's almost like airtight. You've got there's a transgender companion, there's a female doctor, and then there's you've got a black doctor who as an actor is gay, and then the companion he had has just been replaced by another companion of color, and then there's some person in a wheelchair who can fire laser guns out of their wheelchair, and all this stuff. It's so absolute. So the crash from that absolutely delightful dottiness and intelligence of the show to this just almost kind of, in a very kind of weird way, kind of nasty imposition of all this stuff just sucks out all the character and all the charm out of it. And it makes me kind of a little bit angry, to be honest. So that's my choice.
The attitude that I get from it is very much like what you get from Velma. It's that same attitude of grievance and prickliness and arrogance and
sanctimony.
Yeah, it's essentially like I despise my own audience, but I'm obliged to put on something for them. So I'll do this, but I'll use it as an excuse to lecture them at the same time. And it's an interesting point you made there about just the character of the Doctor and all those things that you mentioned. And I compare that with the Christmas special that we got there with our new Doctor, where he's dancing in a nightclub in a vest and he's got the big muscles and stuff. And I thought, oh my God, you're trying to make Doctor Who cool.
Yeah.
Why? His entire thing is like he's the opposite of what coolness is. Like he's quirky, he's fun. Like, yeah, it makes him so shallow and superficial when you try to do this.
I'm not a huge Doctor Who fan, so I'm going to throw this question out, particularly to Echo and Drinker, because you seem to have seen a lot of it. Do you think that there's an element of iconoclasm here? Like during the George Floyd riots, there was a lot of statues torn down. It even happened in England where people left-wing political activists would take ropes and throw them onto statues and pull the statues down and then cheer, yeah, and throw it in the river. And they had no idea who any of these people were. They just wanted to destroy something that was old and maybe beloved on a little local level. They wanted to impose their ideology at the point of a gun, basically, and to spit on anyone who disagrees. Do you think there's an element of that kind of Red Guard Maoist iconoclasm going on here, whereby the writers they genuinely enjoy just destroying this old English thing, as if to say that identity doesn't exist anymore, and if you say it does, you're a bigot?
I don't think they have that malice. I think they genuinely think that they're being valiant and productive, that they have this thing, and instead of prioritizing how can it be original and entertaining, their priority is, it's this vehicle can we use? How can we use it for purposes that we think are positive and progressive and constructive in society? And so they're coming at it from that perspective where they think they're actually being morally progressive and ahead of the curve. And so using it as in that, from their perspective, a constructive sense is them framing it in a positive way in their own minds without actually caring about what the fan base thinks.
I think we've also go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree in the sense that I don't think they're trying to destroy the Doctor so much as they are trying to change him into something that's more useful to them. Because at his heart, he was always a very patriarchal figure. And I don't mean that as like representing the patriarchy and like subjugating people around him. More that he was the eccentric uncle, or he was the father figure. And the companion was quite often a young woman, or at least it was someone who was much younger than him, more impressionable, more idealistic, and it balanced out his world-weary kind of experience. But that kind of figure, I guess, is now seen as very dated and problematic, particularly because he was always played by white British actors. And all of that is just seen as now old-fashioned, and it has to be changed. And there's probably an element of, we have to give other people their time. Now, they have to have their turn of being the Doctor. They have to see themselves represented in him, or her, as the case may be. And that's probably their mindset of doing it. The Doctor is less like a definable character now, and it's just almost just like an avatar that anyone can see themselves as.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they're just going to gradually like cover every possible variation of diversity with each subsequent Doctor. That'll be what they try to do now. And like Echo says, they probably think they're having a positive impact on society by doing this, but they're having a negative impact on the creative output of their show.
There's a great line in The Incredibles where the villain says, when everyone is super, no one will be. And I think that applies to basically identity. What is an Irishman? An Irishman is an Irishman because he's not Chinese, right? Exclusivity is a very important part of identity, right? And in the case of Doctor Who, if anyone can be Doctor Who, if you can be a gay black Ethiopian, or you can be an annoying woman, or whatever, they'll eventually get to the transgender Doctor and the Asian Doctor. If anybody can be the Doctor, then he's nothing. He doesn't really exist. He doesn't have an identity.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think that part of it is, we've talked in the past. I know you love postmodernism, and I think that part of this is that same postmodernist. I'm very clever because I'm subverting the old, and it just so happens to coincide with the old thing is an older white fatherly figure, and so if I can appear to be clever by doing something different, and I can subvert this thing that politically I'm opposed to, well then. Shit, this is the greatest thing ever. I think that we're going to see that same thing. James Bond is a very similar figure. He's always a white guy. He's always, a very aggressive white guy with, it's a different woman every movie, that kind of thing. And I think they've been kicking around the idea for quite some time of changing him up, changing his personality, changing the way that he looks. And I think it's the same thing. I don't know that it's 100% malice. I think it's just they're out of ideas. This appears to be clever. It's controversial, so it will get headlines and some PR. And yeah, there's a little bit of bitterness. And if we can do all of those things and knock down our political opponents one or two pegs, or think that we're going to troll the trolls like Jessica Gao did, well then, great. That's just frosting on the cake. So, yeah.
I think there's definitely a contingent of people out there, and I've spoken about this before, who I think are motivated solely to score points like this. Every time a character like the Doctor gets race swapped or gender swapped, or eventually, like you say, it's going to happen to James Bond or any other like superhero or whatever. I think they let out a little cheer and they can all celebrate, because for them, we've got another one. We've taken down another one, and we've taken it away from the chuds on the other side, and they just take real joy in that. And I think it's an interesting mindset, but that voice that they have, it's surprisingly loud for the number of people that probably actually support it. But it has an influence.
Well, so there's the carnage and wreckage of our childhoods, and wanted to talk a little bit more about this idea of childhood and the idea of the positivity that comes from being scared when you're a kid. So here's some cool little quotes about when you're a kid or a young, and you see stuff on TV and films that you probably shouldn't, and it kind of rattles you, and how that can actually be good. So fear, through visceral dread and jump scares, and also through confronting emotion, can be a rite of passage. There's something really powerful about sharing a scary experience with someone. It's why we ride roller coasters together. It's why we tell ghost stories around campfires. Horror movies help us contextualize the things that give us anxiety and fear, and give us a controlled way to examine them and experience catharsis. Horror movies may help children develop emotional resilience and the ability to manage their fears. Now, your young kids these days, they actually quite like a bit of horror, but their horror is like Army of the Dead, or that stupid Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, or Megan. And that's different to the type of horror that I grew up with, because the horror I grew up with was genuinely grueling and upsetting. So I'm just going to share some of my moments that I watched when I was like 10 or 11. So the guy who's
Echo, you're speaking to my soul here. Echo, when I was a little boy, that terrified me.
Yeah.
Absolutely
so
terrified me.
Comes out of the nuclear waste, and then if you think that isn't harrowing enough, he shuffles out into the street, gets smacked into by a car, and then decapitates them with green sludge and goo going over the.
He just
kind
of explodes all over the windshield.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a way to go.
Horrifying. It's brilliant effects. Like that's RoboCop for anyone who's wondering. The effects are brilliant. The practical effects.
Terminator 2, where this orderly in a hospital licks the face of this comatose patient, and I thought, as an 11-year-old, maybe I shouldn't be watching this so much.
Because I think this is not a deleted scene, but it's like the special edition or something that you see this in. Because I remember as a kid, like this was not in it, and when I first saw this scene, I was like, "Oh, that's weird. I never saw that one before."
And then, like a steel spike going through the head of a guy, it goes through his milk carton that he's drinking. And he's still twitching from the brain reflex from the spike that's gone through his head. Richter getting his arms severed off. And then, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger grabs the severed stumps of his arms. See with the body, Richter. It's shocking to even conceive or dream of that scene. And then to see it as a kid, unbelievable. Oh, man, monumental. Worms, bugs, slowly crawling across people's faces, and squirming their way into your ear in the Wrath of Khan with James Horner's soundtrack, just like percussion, and then Chekhov screaming. God, that was horrific. I couldn't sleep for a week because I had to have my pillow against my ears just in case one of those bugs got in my ear. So genuinely shocking stuff. This from Stand By Me, where the boys go into a bog or something, and there's all these leeches, and they start like desperately trying to get the leeches off them. And then Geordie at the very end, he realizes he has a leech on his genitals, and he has to reach into his underwear and pull this bleeding leech off his own genitals before he faints.
Oh.
This is the Kurgan from Highlander, who, in a scene that I'll never forget, goes on a manic joyride with a screaming, shrieking woman in the passenger seat, and he drives. Goes up onto the sidewalk, and you see these momentary half-second flickers of pedestrians before they get smacked and killed in this weird blue-red lighting. It's unbelievably.
Doesn't he get in the car and go like, "Hi, Mom"?
Yeah.
He starts imitating her screams and everything. It's superb stuff.
He starts mowing down pedestrians and he's going,
"Excuse me." Terrifying.
It's just
movies were hardcore back then, man.
Oh yeah.
I miss when movies were good.
An acolyte's beating heart being pulled out of his chest and then catching fire. I can't remember if it catches fire.
Got my video. That got my Indiana Jones video demonetized. My Indy 5 video, because I included that scene. I had Kathleen Kennedy tearing the heart out of like Indiana Jones or something.
That's a good idea. And of course, as a kid, seeing the strung up human being saying, "Please kill me," before a xenomorph erupts out of her stomach, leading to all this other stuff. So, like I said, with those other more recent films, there's jump scares and style, but these other things that I've shown you, they had like a constant grueling atmosphere of stress and tension that lingers in the mind. And it's good to be scared like that because you're confronted with something and you have to deal with it. And it's like, I'm leaving behind this rope and I'm taking hold of this new rope because I'm sort of like growing and changing and adapting to this, which is great. And one last thing I wanted to show you, which is the kind of antithesis of all this. When I was a kid and I watched this scene, I liked it. It's two adults talking about very adult things in very adult subdued tones with very adult ironies and tensions. And as a kid, I could cope with it and I liked it because I'm interested in these characters and I'm interested in this idea of wow, people can get old and people can have this kind of melancholy to them. And it made me so invested in the characters that I cared about them. So what I'm saying with all this pish is that kids are incredibly capable of dealing with visceral stuff, being confronted with intense stuff, and it can be really good for building up resilience and expanding their horizons. And I just think I wonder that we don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I think, I agree 100%. It's great seeing all these references that you've made because it's pretty much my childhood summarized in the past couple of minutes. And it's interesting that a lot of these horrific moments came in action movies or like action thrillers rather than straight up horror films, but like they were willing to dabble in body horror and violence and stuff to quite a degree. And because it was couched in that, you kind of didn't mind as a kid. Like you were definitely aware of like the body horror and all that, but because it was all wrapped in this framework of like a gung-ho action movie, it somehow made it acceptable. And your parents, most of the time, they just didn't mind too much. It's like, he's not bothering us for a couple hours. It's okay.
Is he home yet? Yeah, is he home yet?
Yeah. But no, I think it is a good thing to have that resilience because, hey, life throws lots of challenges at you, and not necessarily like mutants that have just crawled out of toxic waste or whatever, but things that might be scary or things that will leave you worried or stressed or whatever. And having had that little bit of experience of just dealing with those emotions, it's pretty useful thing to have. And
audiences want that. Like there's a real thirst for that kind of surrogate terror whereby you're put in a situation where you are terrified without being physically in danger. And that's one of the reasons why horror movies are the very few genres that have survived as long as they have continuously without a break. And it's one of the it's the last mid-budget movie today. So if you'll get an M. Thregan for $40 million, or you'll get a Saw movie for $50 million.
Or a
Because
Black Phone.
and studios love it because they can make these things for
Mm-hmm.
$40-50 million, and then they'll go on to make $300-400 million. They love those horror movies. So horror movies it's one of the very few genres that has never had a break. It's been popular forever because people, I think, they love that. They love feeling that emotion of terror, of real, just being scared.
Can I ask you guys a question, actually? Because my feeling on horror movies, and I've got a fairly narrow scope of horror movies that I really enjoy, and it usually is ones that break the tension at just the right moment, because I feel like there's a bit of that tightrope that you have to walk with horror movies, with balancing out the scares, the tension, and the occasional bit of either levity or just a break in the tension just to ease off a little bit. Because I feel like if you skew too much towards like the serious drama and tension and scares, and there's nothing to level it off, it just becomes kind of depressing and disturbing, and it's not fun anymore. Obviously, if you skew too far in the opposite direction, then it's not scary and it's not tense. It's just basically a goofy comedy. But I was just wondering, is that just me, or do you guys feel the same way when it comes to enjoying horror films?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if there's a film like, if the plotting and the writing isn't good, then the body horror just feels kind of sickly and horrible and off. Like those new Alien films. You've got the character who has, like, he's on the table and the alien bursts out of his back or whatever. It's well rendered, but it feels off, and it feels gratuitous and nasty because the rest of the film around it isn't cohesive enough or sophisticated enough to warrant that kind of stuff. So I'd say that's just that.
I don't watch a lot of horror movies because I usually find them to just be, it's a lot of gore and it's a lot of slashing and that kind of stuff, and it's not fun. But as you were listing those, I don't know that I would even classify those as like horror or scary movies. I think a lot of people in the comments are saying they're suspenseful, they're stressful, and I think that there's a big difference there where the writing is better because they don't rely on the constant giving and the blood and all of that. While you were listing those, I was thinking of one that really affected me when I was a kid. It was a sci-fi movie called Screamers, and it's fabulous. It's stressful the entire way through. You don't know who's a friend and who's an android, who's a sword. Yeah. It was fabulous, and it struck that balance of suspense. There was some action, there was some blood, there was some dismemberment, if I remember correctly. But I don't know that I would classify those as horror movies. I think of like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, that kind of stuff, Candyman, that sort of thing. But I like the suspense, stress, psychological side of it, less of the the killer is coming to get you, not the killer is actually stabbing somebody, that kind of thing.
A great case study for what works and what doesn't is the difference between Hereditary and Midsommar. So Hereditary, I think, is brilliant. I think it's very effective. It really works, and it's very well paced. It breaks up the more slow exposition, sort of subtextual expositionary scenes with more dramatic stuff, and it works really well. It's very well structured. And then Midsommar is very poorly paced and very poorly structured, and it takes too long with its its visual exposition and its subtext, and there's too much symbolism packed into these big long scenes, and the director's trying to do too much. So if Midsommar it does have some redeeming aspects, but if it was better paced and if there was a bit more happening in it, I think it would be much more effective, because it gets to the point where you're just sort of bored watching Midsommar. Whereas I was always very enraptured and really felt the psychological tension when I was watching Hereditary. And that's the same director. That's why I make the distinction between those two, because it's the same director, but he got it right the first time around with Hereditary. And then I think when he was able to do more of his own thing and just do whatever he wanted, he went too far with it with Midsommar.
Brilliant. All right, well, we're going to move on, and we're going to play the Culture War. Is everybody ready? Here we go. Okie dokie. All right. So, Drinker, you're not familiar with this, I don't think. So, basically, I'm going to give these guys some questions, and they're going to have to do quick fire answers. And, Drinker, you're going to be the judge, and you're going to decide which pitch you like the best. So, Greg, do you have something prepared?
Yes. Yep, I had to look some things up to refresh my memory, but I've got one that I think I can defend.
Okay, well, let's get underway. And you know the rules. Your time begins when you see the clock. Go.
All right, I'm going to go with The Dark Knight. This one was a fabulous movie. I think this was a big step forward in the superhero genre, kind of paving the way for what we think of as the superhero genre today. It was a much more serious tone. It wasn't wacky. It wasn't the holy rusted metal Batman that we saw in previous iterations. It actually had a point, and I think that it was genre defining and deserved that Oscar that it did not get.
Well, I think you get a lot of sympathy in the audience there. Okay. Despot, do you have a choice?
Yeah, I'm going Bill Murray for Lost in Translation.
Oh, all right. Let's see what you've got. Your time begins when you see the clock. Go.
All right, so Bill Murray lost to Sean Penn from Mystic River. But at the time, people thought of that Bill Murray performance as, oh, it's a good Jerry Man performance. It's good, but, really he's just getting it because it's his turn. He's Bill Murray, so he's getting nominated. But when you look back at that performance today, there's so much nuance. It's so beautiful, and he's able to establish very real feeling chemistry with a much younger woman. It really is a remarkable and mostly just a beautiful performance, and it should have gotten way more credit than it did.
All right, impressive. Well, I have my own one as well, and I'm going to break the rules on my own live stream. I'm not going to have a timer clock because I've got a lot to say. I have a lot to say, and I think you're going to agree with me. So I'll just bring my thing up. Mine is for Best Supporting Actor. All right, and here it is. Wilson was overlooked for his performance in a supporting role in Castaway. It remains the most egregious snub in Oscar history. Wilson, born Isaac Wilsonberg, endured setbacks at the outset of his career, falling prey in a pre-Me Too era to indiscriminate slaps and groping on the set during his grueling debut performance as the volleyball in Top Gun. It is testament to his perseverance, then, that Wilson experienced a career revival when brought on board for the Tom Hanks motion picture Castaway. Wilson imbued the role with a mature understatement and ultra-minimal dialogue, neither chewing the scenery nor opting for emotional button-pushing, instead showing the restraint to perform a supporting role in service to the script. Wilson's self-awareness had the consequence of inviting the viewer to interpret his character in a variety of ways, as a principal in a buddy film genre piece, as the audience's conduit into the film, as a vector for the plot, and as an enabler of exposition. Wilson's empathy, conveyed in the form of an ironic reserve, has the effect of making Tom Hanks's questions recurrently fold back upon themselves as rhetoricals, forcing him to comprehend, contend with, and ultimately surmount his obstacles. This key element, in a sense, adds resonances of a mentor archetype to Wilson's already multifaceted characterization. Tom Hanks's eventual departure from the island on a raft leads to one of the most devastating losses of a character in cinema. Because of our emotional investment in Wilson, his slipping away, unmoored, and drifting from the raft is a scene of extraordinary poignancy. Tom Hanks, clutching a rope, strains to regather his disappearing friend, and the brutal choice to return to the raft, to make a literal return to safety, as well as a symbolic psychological cession from reliance and restoration to a full acknowledgement of his solitary plight, is a climax of such heart-rending solemnity that no viewer has ever experienced that scene without feeling an ache of sadness. In this wider sense, Wilson's departure is a form of noble sacrifice, a necessary breach in the hero's journey meta-narrative construction. Wilson's performance is the most profound and Oscar-worthy depiction of this defining moment of Jungian individuation. His performance endures. It is a shame the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is yet to account for this, and in some meaningful way, atone.
So, Echo, see when I open up a modern art gallery to like launder money, I want you to write the descriptions of the different art pieces.
So too many of those. What was that quote that you posted last time that had all the non-words? You've been reading too much of that, and it's seeping in.
Yeah.
Well, it just makes me mad. That's all.
I have to say, if I have to make my ruling, Greg, Despot, you both made extremely compelling arguments, but I think Echo has got to take this one. Wilson, legit. I actually think he did give a better performance than Echo did.
He did.
Better dialogue. The facial expressions are more responsive, yeah.
Oh, for
But
sure,
no,
yeah, better acting range.
Well, I appreciate that you liked it, but I did break the rules, so that means that these other two boys get to progress on to the next stage.
Okay.
So, which means they've got to. So I'll get rid of Wilson here. Right. So, pitch a movie as much a commercial and critical success for men as Barbie was for women. So, what is a film that would bring men flooding into the cinemas and make them feel like, yes, we feel acknowledged and seen? So, Greg, do you have something for us?
I think so.
I'll
Well,
go
let's
first.
see what you got.
I'll give Greg a minute to gather his thoughts because I've got.
Yeah,
my
I've been
pitch
thinking about
written
this a
down.
lot. I still got nothing, but you go ahead. The extra 30 seconds is definitely going to help.
Okay, Despot, when you see the clock, go. You're on.
Just say your time starts now because I'm reading it
Okay.
off my Word document.
Right. Your time starts now.
The year is 2375. Chad Tanning is a hired gun working as a contractor for a separatist colony of lesbian Amazons. He and his crew of trustworthy former Marines are working out when word comes in that a pirate crew of star swine, man-pig hybrids have landed in a town near the capital and are rounding up young women and girls. Chad soon discovers that his girlfriend is cut off and in danger of capture. Can Chad and his crew save the women, kill the space swine, and save Chad's woman? Find out in Attack on Lesbos Prime.
Well, take my money.
Yeah, I'm sold.
Yeah. Okay, Greg. Well, good luck, Greg, because
I'm screwed.
your time begins now. Whatever you've got, spit it out.
Look, this movie has already been made. It was made in the 80s. It was made in the 90s. My movie pitch is to just make those movies that men actually liked before they were told to like movies they don't like. So I don't have a specific movie. I have just make the ones that made money already. There you have it. And the men will come pouring in. You're going to need someone with muscles. You're going to need some guns, some explosions, and a gal that has a lot of butt and boobs, and he saves her. That's my movie.
All right. You could have mentioned cocaine, but still something there. So Drinker, I'm out of the running here, obviously, but so you have to decide between these two.
All right.
So what are your thoughts?
So Despot is going to take this one. I'm fully sold on Attack on Lesbos Prime, particularly because the main character's called Chad.
Yeah, damn.
Greg, I think I like where you were going with it. I think you just needed some more specific ideas.
I mean, I had no hope of beating Lesbos Prime. The only thing you didn't mention was that one of the main characters' buddies is killed by Snoo by the women of Lesbos, and that's pretty much it. That tops it.
All right. Well, Despot, you're today's winner. Congratulations. Now, I'm going to take you guys to, when heading towards the end, and I'm going to take you guys to a dark place. All right. One of the darkest reaches of the world. It's called Reddit.
Okay.
Now, okay. So I'm an author. I write novels. And every now and again, if I have like an idea for a premise, then I like to sort of test it out. And on Reddit, they have these places where you can test your query letters. So a query letter is what a writer will send to agents, send like to 200 agents. And it's basically the premise, like the blurb you'd see in the back of the book, plus some contact details, maybe some information about who you are, why they might be a good fit for you as an agent. And so on these Reddit sites, you can pitch your query letter, and then people will give you criticism and advice and suggestions. So I'm a bit like Lucasfilm, where I'll just like, I've got some ideas, and so I'll just float it out and see what happens, and if anyone likes it. So just kind of on a whim, I sort of suggested this as a premise that I wanted sort of people to look about. So it is the fall of 1856, and young Mason has joined the abolitionist cause along the troubled Missouri frontier. His mentor, Owen, asks him to assist in a daring effort to convey a slave named Elijah to freedom in the North. Elijah is delivered to them, but the foray goes terribly wrong, and Owen is swept away while the trio attempt to ford a river. Knowing they will be pursued, the naive Mason despairs over what to do. The pathways through Missouri are roamed by slave owners and pro-slavery sympathizers keen to claim rewards. Mason elects to cross into the wild Kansas plains, then head north, but the territory, contested by free state settlers and pro-slavery border ruffians, is gripped with unrest and poses as many dangers. Everywhere Mason and Elijah travel, faces are clued up with hardship, crops are unharvested, columns of men cross the land, towns are set ablaze in this bleeding Kansas. The pair can barely stay ahead of Elijah's former master and his crew. Elijah's character emerges, and he asserts his independence, unwilling to defer to the callow boy he has found himself with. Most daunting of all for Mason, Elijah soon shows a willingness to face down their pursuers. So what do you think of that? It's just like a general story premise idea.
Yeah, sounds pretty good. It's
Reasonable enough?
slave trying to escape into freedom shortly
Mhm.
before the Civil War. Yeah, it's good.
Sounds like it could get really tense. A lot of tense moments, I think, would be really fun to read, and a lot of good cliffhangers to end chapters on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's see what Reddit critique people thought. You're from all appearances a white author writing a book about a white abolitionist as either historical or literary fiction. This is going to be an uphill battle at best. I strongly recommend you have at a bare minimum sensitivity readers. Your final dilemma is very problematic. All I see is Mason is naive and doesn't like that Elijah is asserting his independence and wants to face his pursuers. Because let's face it, the people chasing them are the ones who believe Elijah is their property. He's got every right to want to face them, and he would know perfectly well what those consequences are. So why is this presented as a bad thing in the query? I'll emphasize a few points. Sensitivity readers, you desperately need to have them and consider their advice. This book is probably dead in the water. Query if you want to, but you're going to struggle. I want to start by saying that if you are a black, please ignore me. If you are not, I don't think the market is in a place for this book. This is a story about getting a slave to freedom that looks like it's hinting at a men-loving men interracial romance. But Elijah is not the main character. Maybe this was fine 15 years ago, but this isn't what the market wants to do right now. You want us to separate the structure writing of the query from the many very legitimate concerns about your premise itself, and it's impossible to do that. No agent will do that either. Much easier to just send it to the reject pile. And lastly, your premise is straight out of a bad Time Machine will end up in the reject pile. Probably have a really long, hard think about why you couldn't foresee the comments you're getting here. The fact that you couldn't makes me doubt you can execute a turnaround. But as it is, this is absolutely DOA. Makes my blood boil. Fuck these people.
I mean,
Did you
to
get
be fair-
anything positive out of it? Did anyone say
Nothing. Not a single positive reaction.
Wow.
Not one. Not
Not
one.
one. Not
To
any person talked about the actual merit of the premise or the historical relativism or how it was crafted or shaped together. Just endless piling on of negativity and aiming from this identity politics angle. Even
Let me
though
ask
the white character is callow and naive and he's the weaker character, even that wasn't enough for them.
Well,
I was
let me
going to say,
ask you
I would
this.
think that they would love the fact that basically the premise is that, you know, the guy thinks he's going to be a white knight, and then turns out
Exactly.
that
It subverts that.
the slave
It
has
subverts
the
that.
growth arc.
Yes. Unbelievable.
This sensitivity readers thing just kept coming up again and again. Is this a thing now for making books? Because I don't remember them when I was writing.
It's a thing
Yeah.
for everything, and it's hilarious how often it turns out to be hilariously racist. I don't know if you guys follow what happens with Dungeons and Dragons, but they brought on sensitivity readers, and they promised that they were going to change certain things because the sensitivity readers, and I love the irony of this, they read about the race of orcs, which are, you know, dark skinned, they have tusks. And they're generally more violent. You know, they're not inherently evil, but they are, you know, they're a rougher race. And sensitivity readers read that description of this fantasy race and went, wow, this is obviously describing black people, and that's offensive. And I don't know how they don't see the hilarity that their mind went to.
Yeah.
This is unacceptable because you're clearly talking about black people. Nope, but I don't know who the racist here is, but I think it's you.
Yeah, it's when they pick out things like that, and it's like it's not saying what you think it's saying, my friend.
Also,
But Greg, you got it, Greg. In 10 seconds, you understood that it was subverting that white knight trope. And that was the whole like narrative energy of the thing. And you got that in 10 seconds that none of these people could figure out. And the fact that someone would say they could interpret that somehow there's like a gay element to it, that just the projection is so fierce.
Yeah.
I'm
This
glad
is
you
where
said
the
it was
industry, it
man-loving man,
seems-
because I thought it was a multi-level marketing story, and I was it took me a second to catch up. But that's just
Pyramid
me.
schemes were a thing back in the 1860s, don't you know?
How did Arbonne get into this? I don't understand.
It's interesting though that guy who couched his comment by saying, "Hey, if you're black, then reject all of my criticisms. They're totally invalid. But if you're a white guy, fuck you. How dare you write about any of this stuff?"
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that basically and they were like, why would the white guy be scared? And I think that, I mean, it makes perfect sense. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna get a slave across the border, and then the slave's like, we're gonna fight him, and he's like, whoa. I didn't sign up to die. I just wanted to get you, and I wanted to be a hero. Like, yeah, I totally see the character arc that he has going on. And then, yeah, I don't understand how they don't see that of the two characters. It's very much like Ken and Barbie. Like, one of them is going to have a growth arc and actually be a character, and the other, you know, I mean, maybe I'm sure that you would make the other the white guy an actual character, but of the two, the stronger character seems to be the slave.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah. Deliberately.
I also like the realism of that. The fact that the abolitionist, the person trying to get the slave out of there, isn't prepared to risk his life. That's actually quite good because it dismantles that annoying fucking trope in Hollywood movies. Whenever they do talk about slavery, the people who are trying to get the slaves to freedom are always presented as kind of these idols of moral perfection and courage. And they're always going to stand their ground and fight. And it's like, no, they're people like anybody else. And most people are cowards. And when it comes down to it, whatever their cause is, they're going to turn tail and run unless there's a gun pointed at their back telling them to get forward and move. So that's quite a nice trope deconstruction, good trope deconstruction, not Last Jedi deconstruction. Basically, you take a crappy trope and you just get rid of it, and you do something a bit more realistic and grounded and fresh. That's really refreshing. Like, I like that.
So it just kind of got me down a little bit because of the shrinking and narrowing. For me, as a writer, writing is a sacred space. And I get so pent up when people try to impose their bullshit on it and take away those freedoms and limit the perspectives you can make. When I was growing up, there was a book called The Ghost Road by Patrick Barker. And I loved the book because it was such an incredible depiction of how men think and the inner recesses of what masculinity is. And I thought only a man could write this. And it wasn't until 10 years later that I realized that Patrick was actually Pat and the author was actually a woman. So the scope for which people can explore other people's lives and expand horizons, I hate it when that ground is encroached upon. Makes me really angry.
Yeah, I mean, American Psycho was directed by a woman, and it's one of the most guy movies of all time.
The appeal of writing is always that it's the purest form of creativity because you're not constrained by resources. You know, like you don't have to worry about a budget. You're limited only by your imagination, and there's something really magical about that. And it's up to you to then hone your skill at describing the things that you're imagining, but there's no limits to what you can do. But like you say, when people like this come along, it's like they're trying to impose all of these limitations on what you're allowed to write about. The things that you're allowed to tackle, the things that you're allowed to imagine. And what right do they have to do that? What right do they have to do that to anyone? To say like, oh, well, you're not equipped to talk about this. You don't have the right to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
No, fuck you. I'll write about whatever I damn well please. It's not up to you to decide what I'm allowed to tackle.
It's cultural gatekeeping. I mean, this is the opposite of cultural appropriation. And it's a word that I think we need to sort of spread around the culture more, cultural gatekeeping, because that's what they're doing. They're trying to gatekeep creativity, imagination, culture, literature, movies, etc. They're trying to gatekeep it from certain groups. It's just gatekeeping, and it's the most disgusting, spiteful, and bitter kind of gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Deco, I don't remember in the description, did you identify the abolitionist as a white guy?
Yes. Well, actually, no, but I think you could basically infer it. I think.
What I would love
have
is
to be,
if,
I would imagine.
I would love it if you would make a new account and specifically identify that the abolitionist is a black man, that he's a former freed slave, but keep everything else exactly the same. He's still naive, all that jazz, and then resubmit it under a different name and see if the reaction is different. That would be hilarious.
Put a picture of a black man in your profile photo as well.
Yeah.
Just to see what the reaction is then.
No, I'm just going to be the 10 millionth person to just go onto Reddit and go, oh, I'm leaving Reddit. I can't do anything with them. So anyway, I thought we'd do a couple of super chats. If you guys are lingering around, we'll just go through them. Here we go. So let me see. How do we show the super chat? Oh, Daryl George. Hello, George. All hail, Echo Chamberlain. Been loving your streams. You too, George. Congratulations, my friend, and on to many more. Always forward. Well, if any luck, I'll have a stream which is 1/10 the size of your debut stream. which I think you were on, Drinker.
I was indeed, yeah. It's good to be there.
Oh, my dear fellow Kiwi, RRT and Z, who I'm going to call Rittens from now on, for $20. Congratulations, Echo, bringing such a top-notch panel into our New Zealand time zone. Use as much Kiwi slang as you can. Sure, bro. Question for guests. What's the most ridiculous thing you've heard about New Zealand? So Echo can confirm or deny. Good question.
The most ridiculous thing I've heard about New Zealand is that it doesn't exist.
Well, I can deny.
Every single person there is a hobbit, in fact.
I can confirm.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. Huge, horrible feet. Yeah.
That people greet each other. I think people just greet each other doing the haka. Like pretty much that's a very consistent greeting, I think.
Yeah, it's very exhausting. By the end of the day, you're sweating and tired. Yeah. Yeah, but we are almost invisible. And we almost don't exist because we're so geopolitically isolated from everyone else. That one former prime minister of ours described us as a strategic dagger pointed at the heart of Antarctica. Big Hat Legion. All we need is a cardboard cutout of Mauler. Yeah, well, that could be arranged. Yeah, or just a still shot of a critical doggo.
Yeah.
Thank you, Big Hat Legion. What else we got here? Drinker, have you been able to save Tatiana and her family from the Ukraine and created a house cleaning empire with their illegal labor?
Well, I mean, she's definitely
all want
employed over here. It's just not necessarily cleaning houses, shall we say. She's kept busy, though.
It's important. It's the important thing. RRT and Z again. Chuck Norris got a PhD in mathematics for solving an unsolvable maths problem by writing a single word, violence, because Chuck Norris can solve any problem with violence. He should run Disney. Well, yeah, absolutely. Could only do better than what we currently got.
I'm going to amend my answer. That's my movie that appeals to men. Bring back Chuck. There it is.
Bring
right
back Chuck.
there. He's
That's
on the
just the title.
poster.
Yeah.
Guys are there.
Maybe Marvel can do a what if where the males are.
No, that's just too crazy. That's too out there.
Yeah.
They could do a what if. What if Marvel didn't suck?
Yeah. What if Marvel made money?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mo. Fermented Cinema. What if the Drinker and Echo made a movie review together? The delicious layers of sarcasm would collapse into a black hole larger than that left by Disney. P.S. Check out Fermented Cinema, waiting for you at the Singularity. Oh yeah, I'm sure there's a film we could agree on.
Nice.
Team America would be great fun, I think.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I haven't done a sarcastic review in a while either, so I need to do another one of them.
Fermented Cinema again. On an international scale, Star Wars has fallen the furthest by far. Here in Japan, for example, it was the most popular of the four. Well, I think commercially, like one of you guys was saying, it probably has fallen the most.
Probably in terms of its cultural impact as well.
Yeah, culturally, it's irrelevant now. There's many franchises bigger than it.
Nicholas Cowling. What currency is that?
It's Korean won, I think.
Oh, cool. Just dropping some support and congrats on your 4-year anniversary. Yeah, that's right. 4 years I've been at this. And I think the penultimate one, Armchair Troop. That last scene in Day of the Dead where the guy is ripped in half by the zombie horde mortified me when I was 8, but I'm not the biggest fan of the zombie genre. I don't know that
impressive.
Scene.
I remember it. Yeah, it's like Barnes or something, who's like the villain of the piece, and yeah, he gets shot in the stomach, and then like the zombies kind of tear him apart, and he literally gets torn in half. And it's some incredible like practical effects. Obviously, this is way before CGI could do anything. Yeah, very good combination of like gore effects and like the actor obviously having prosthetics on that they could be pulled off him. Very good stuff. And yeah, it's disgusting as fuck.
Excellent. And lucky last, Dark Sith 87 for $20 legitimate dollars. You boys see Lost Souls Childhood Died music video solidifies the shite sandwich Disney Star Wars served us. Hilarious.
It is fucking hilarious, and I do recommend that you go look. It's like 2 minutes. It's a metal song about why Star Wars sucks now, and it's fabulous. Yes, a buddy of mine sent it today. It's very good. Yes.
Well, I'd like to end on a bit of positive, nice news, and this tickles my fancy. So, Chad Stahelski, the director of the John Wick films, he has had his eye on the Highlander franchise, and he's got his hands on it. So, imagine the John Wick aesthetic with all that love and attention from a guy who's a purist about Highlander, which is one of my favorite all-time films. And then you get Henry Cavill as the Highlander dude fuck James Bond, do this guy instead. So I can't wait for this. This has me like riled up like a little kid. I think this is going to be a blast, and I can't wait for it to go into production. The only thing that'll be missing is a super camp, but also kind of stonking soundtrack from Queen. That
is true. I mean, I'm glad that Chad Stahelski's in control of this one. That gives me a little bit of hope. It's not going to have the same 1980s charm that the original Highlander had. It was perched right on the edge of being goofy, but it always managed to pull it back. And they won't have Sean Connery, sadly.
That is true.
It also has that really good 80s aesthetic, which is just the perfect contrast to the medieval Scotland look. They go really well together. The aesthetic of the movie is beautiful. And I'm wondering how you would capture that today.
Well, I believe in Chad. I think having done the John Wick films, there's just a little bit of camp in there. There's a little bit of showing off spectacle. He loves dropping in cultural references, high and low, does action sequences incredibly. So the sword fights for the quickening are going to be super awesome. Yeah. And Henry's done The Witcher. He's done his he's done his preparation for the role.
Sword training.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is going to be a blast.
I think you're going to see a lot more of this stuff. I think that I was talking to my wife about this. I think that you're going to see a big push toward Irish and Scottish mythology and lore, and I think that's going to be the next big thing, especially in America. We kind of obsessed over Britain for a while with the Great British Baking Challenge and The Crown, and we were very in love with Britain for a while. But I think the success of Outlander, the success of Poldark, which I know is in Cornwall, but this Highlander in books, we're moving toward Fae. Fae is the new big thing, not zombies, not vampires, not werewolves, and it's very much like a Scottish Irish Fae. They're mentioning the hookah, I think, is a mythological creature. So I think you're going to see a lot more of this stuff, and that'll actually add to the success of this movie, because I think Americans are really into old Ireland and old Scotland right now, and fiction is moving that way.
Cool, bring it on.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Well, that's about it for today. So all that really remains is for me to have the great pleasure of thanking Mr. Greg Owen. Anything you want to tell the folks, Greg? What you got coming up?
This week, I've got a video coming up about Dad TV involving Reacher, but also shows like Reacher, and just why they're so popular with men and women, and just kind of an exploration of that. So maybe Thursday.
Cool. All right. Despot, what you got going on? And thanks for being on the panel as always.
Yeah, I am presently working on the only award show still worth watching, which is the Worst of Woke Awards, which will be out on February 10th.
Very cool.
And lastly, Drinker, I cannot thank you enough for propelling the conversation, and let's not be coy about this, the analytics of this live stream. So thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks, man. Like I said earlier, I mean, you've come on Open Bar a whole bunch of times, so at least I could do was return the favor. So it was good to be here, and it's great to see you doing this stuff now, like delving into live streaming. And yeah, hopefully you're going to do many more, and you're going to get more and more viewers each time you do it.
Cool. Well, on a transmission note, I've made a new channel. So what I need is for people to subscribe to that second one, so that then I can migrate all the stuff over there. Otherwise, YouTube kind of gets a bit muddled when it comes to the two forms of content. So if people could oblige me on that, there's the Echo Chamberlain live stream YouTube channel.
Just call it the Echo Chamber.
Yeah.
Do it.
Do it. But that's it for today. So thanks everyone in the chat, and Josh, thank you for moderating in there. And that's it. So, ka kite anō, and goodbye for now.
Thanks, sir.
Bye-bye.